And that's my cue. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, and welcome to, I think, number 8 of 9 in the Inclusive Circular Cities series this week as part of Circular Cities Week New York. And today we are talking about the role of the private sector in inclusive circular city transition. How do we incentivize upstream circular business models? My name's James George from Pixera Global, and I'm going to be your host and moderator, navigator for this afternoon's conversation. And I'm joined by 3 amazing panelists who are going to help us dig into the role of the private sector. Emmanuel from Indesa, Gar Punnett from Reaply, and Cindy, who you can't see because she's having some internet issues, but is here in voice and in mind. Perfect, thank you, Cindy, if not visually. A little bit of housekeeping to start with. You'll see, all of us are aficionados with Zoom now, but you'll see at the bottom of your screen 2 boxes of interest, Q&A and chat. If you want to put questions to our panelists during the discussion this afternoon over the next 60 minutes or so, put your questions in there, and the team will make sure we get those to the panelists. Within the chat box, if you want to create a dialogue, say where you're beaming in from, or provide commentary as we're going between the forum of folks who's watching, then use that function as well. And do feel free to communicate, to get stuck in, because otherwise all you're going to be left with is my voice driving this conversation. And I want to hear from you guys, and we've had some really, really great interaction through the course of this week. So cities then, circular cities. It's not a new topic, right? For very many years, we've been talking about how cities potentially present the opportunity for us to test, explore, and realize some of our ambition when we think about the circular economy. In fact, only in the last couple of weeks, there's been a number of announcements around smart cities across the globe from the European Union, and a number of other initiatives about how do we take these almost closed systems that 2/3 of us will be living in by the time we get to 2050, according to the UN, whether that's cities or megacities. How do we design, redesign, interact with the material flows to make our cities circular? But the bit we really want to pull out today as well, when we think about inclusivity, human-centered design, community-driven innovation, how do we make sure that the decisions we take allow those new innovations, business models, technologies to be equitable, to be inclusive, to drive that impact and change? And I couldn't be more delighted with the panel that I have to kind of question and bring forward today. And I'm going to turn over to them to introduce themselves in a moment. But we've got a real spectrum of perspectives, from the large organizations looking at how we create the energy systems we need, to the interaction of the business models and the products that we need to see, all the way down to how we then exchange the materials, person to person, business to business. I'm gonna pause there, and I'm gonna hand over. And Cindy, I'm gonna start with you, if I may. Okay. Please tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us about Signify and the role that you guys form in this space.
Absolutely. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Really a pleasure to be here. My name is Cindy Malinchak. I work for Signify, which a lot of people know as the old Philips Lighting. We moved into Signify about 4 years ago as an overarching company that is a manufacturing company. And we used to be able to say a lighting company, but now I call us a technology company. So we have expanded from lighting into sensors, into smart city offerings, into broadband offerings, telecom. And my role in the public sector is to engage directly with the cities, with the leaders of the municipalities throughout North America, and listen to their voice and bring actually energy efficient options to them, to incorporate smart city options to them, to incorporate, so that together we can build that inclusive and diverse municipality for the city. So welcome, thanks for being here, and I'm really excited to continue the conversation.
Cindy, thanks very much. And Peter, yeah, really quickly to answer your question, Cindy's got some bandwidth issues, so she's staying off camera. So you've got to look at our three faces, I'm afraid, but Cindy is very much here in,
Yep.
here in
We
the background.
apologize that, like I said, I'm working remotely, and so therefore it's sometimes it doesn't work as best we'd like it to.
Amazing, Cindy, thanks. Lots of questions come to my mind straight away with that short introduction, so we will come back to that. Juan Manuel from Endesa, over to you, and I think you've got a few slides.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Just a minute.
It went so well in rehearsal.
Yeah, Murphy laws.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a minute. Yeah, I think that now.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name is Juan Manuel Rosauro. I work in Endesa. It's the leading power company in Spain, and we are part of Enel Group, that is one of the biggest power company in Europe and in the world. I'm leading on behalf of Endesa the ECT Malaga project. ECT Malaga project is a public and private collaboration project that wants to transform Malaga Tech Park into a circular city in 2027. Okay, Malaga Scientific Park is in Malaga, is in the south of Spain. Is an ecosystem where more than 600 companies are, around 2 billion euros revenues, and more than 20,000 employees work there every day. ACT project is a project where all the ecosystem that has joined to the project, the city hall, the scientific part, the regional government, Endesa as the company that is leading this initiative, also the University of Malaga, and more than 30 companies, private companies, we are trying to transform this city and this area that is the scientific part. For us, it's very important the metrics, the goal, and also an open and collaborative environment. We conceptualize the Malaga scientific part like a metabolism, where there are some inputs like energy, materials, water. With these inputs, there is an economic and productive activity focus on the different buildings in the park, but also in the urban space, and also the mobility around the park. And as a result of this, there are some emissions, waste, sewage, water. We have defined a methodology. We go forward from the vision to the strategy that is developing different action lines and goals. We have arranged different work groups, the circular economy group that is defining the strategy, is guaranteeing that we are aligned with the circular economy principles. There are 4 core groups focused in energy, buildings, mobility, urban space, and 2 cross-action groups. Digital one focused on the tools and platforms that allow all the initiatives, and also communication more related with the external communication and internal communication. Just a brief review of the 8 strategies that we have defined for the project, starting from the development of a circularity ecosystem in Malaga Scientific Park. There is an initiative to launch a circular economy academy that will create an awareness about circular economy and how to apply for the different companies and in the city of Malaga, and towards 100% renewables, towards eco-friendly and energy water materials. We've got different initiatives to increase the efficiency in the use of energy and water, towards eco-design, extension of cycle life, also towards shared resource, more focused on sustainable mobility and shared mobility, promoting carpooling, other electrification of the mobility. Another, the sixth strategy is towards servitization, and we are developing an open data platform with application that can help in this transition to circular cities. And of course, two strategies related with the net zero emissions and towards zero waste. Okay, I have going very fast, but it's just to give you an overview of this project, focus on circular cities.
It's amazing. Thank you, Manuel. Thanks for sharing that. And again, we'll get into those conversations, I'm sure, over the course of the session. Finally, to you, Gar and Reaply, tell us a bit about Reaply and your
what are we doing?
your journey.
Yeah. So Gar Punnett, nice to meet everybody. Hopefully meet more people digitally. I'm leading up strategy and our growth strategy here at Reaply. I also have candidly, and I always say this honestly, made up a nice little side title of circular economist. And that's because I'm mostly focused a lot on unit economics of the stuff that we're seeing from our clients, or that's sort of, again, circulating around our economies or our communities that we're focused on. And so circular economy is nothing without actually how the money flows alongside these resources that we're helping connect to either new homes, extended life cycles, or the next phase of their life cycle. And so at Reaply, we're creating technology that really that is manifested in the form of essentially connecting peers at large organizations to resources that might be available at their company that they work at, or extending that almost ecosystem out, as we might say. It's connecting them through our technology to other uses for what could be desks or chairs or lighting fixtures, ceiling tiles, whatever it might be coming out of our large clients and large organizations, connecting those community organizations to those resources as well. And so what this really looks like is a massively upgraded version of Craigslist, or a massively upgraded version of what might be a Facebook marketplace, because often that means we're dealing with very complex rules and regulations around where and why things can move from what organization into another. And so I can get more into that as well, but it's been a lot of fun, and building the tech and the software behind that to make those engagements and to facilitate those transactions is what we believe will help enable that circular movement of materials.
Thanks, Gar. Appreciate that, and we will get into it. Right, there was a wonderful quote from one of our panelists earlier this week that technology is the link between science and society. So we're definitely gonna step into that. So guys, you've heard from our three panelists now. I'm just really quickly to remind you that unless you get stuck in with some of the questions as we go, it's down to me to kind of steer the conversation. So if you've got questions you want to put to our panelists throughout the course of the conversation, please do, and use the Q&A function at the better. Cindy, I want to start with you. I said at the top of the conversation that circular economy in cities is not a new topic. In fact, personally, as I know many of us have described the evolution of the Philips lighting, but then Lux, and now the Signify model. And I've used the example of Schiphol Airport a number of times over the course of the last few years when I think about disrupting the system. What is the role then that global organizations like Signify play in this discussion, especially when we think about the challenges and opportunities around community and design, human-centered design, when we move from the design to the implementation stage?
Yeah, so it's very fortunate to be working for Signify, because at the very top of our leadership team, we believe in that circular vision. And the motto that light is life, and without light, communities, people really don't have the same opportunity to participate in society. So the beautiful part about working for Signify is not only do we as a manufacturing company look within to make sure, and we are net zero company, we're really proud to be able to say that from a global level, but everything from reducing packaging to listening to the cities. And I always say, and Owan and Yao, you were talking about everything that you're doing, and I generally speak to similar positions in the cities that are really trying to look for how to have light equity, how to bring light or telecommunications to every constituent within the city. And because light is an ubiquitous part of every city, knowing that it can play a pivotal part in making sure that everybody within the community has access to good available light, whether it's good available broadband, sensors. We keep evolving at the voice of our customer. So what does the role of a large global corporation play in this whole circular economy conversation? It's about being present. It's about listening to the communities and the people that we're working with and driving and morphing our company to better satisfy what their needs and desires are. So for me, that's a great global circular economy company.
That's really interesting. So it feels like you're talking there around, and it's a really important concept as well when you think about design, thinking about zooming out, but then zooming in to see how that affects your initial hypothesis, and then zooming out again to understand how that fits in the broader context of the holistic solution. I think it's a really important point.
Well, and even like as our, we have 5 pillars of value within our organization, and it is in a circle. And at the center, the bullseye of that circle is customer. And because rather than taking the philosophy, if we build it, they will come, we take the philosophy as tell us what you need and we will build it. And that is the inclusivity part, making and also recognizing that every municipality, every city throughout the world has very unique challenges, very different approaches to how they want to see things. And as a global company, we have to be responsive. We have to be good listeners, and we have to develop products that are friendly to the environment and responsive to the needs of these public sector customers.
Amazing. I imagine, Juan Manuel, that there's parallels here as well, right? When we think about Endesa, part of Enel talks very openly about their work in the transition to renewable energy, and especially around cities. And I like the bit that Cindy mentioned there. Without light, there isn't life. I guess without renewable energy, there isn't light. So when I think about this challenge, and now kind of thinking of at the city level with your work in Malaga, how does Endesa bring these new models to life?
Yeah, well, there are some common points what Cindy have said, because we Endesa, the Enel Group, we are listening also all the time the community and the main stakeholder in the cities. With this information, we have defined a model of circular city. And this is our vision that we are trying to push. We normally establish a long relationship. For example, in Malaga, we have a strong and long relationship with the city hall and the city, and we have done previous smart city labs and different projects. But I believe that the 3 key points where, for example, Endesa and Enel Group do is, one is we have an offering of solutions and services that help to achieve the circular cities, and to do this transition from electrification of the demand to self-consumption photovoltaics, or different solutions to increase the energy efficiency in buildings. Well, we've got a complete portfolio that helps to this transition. Also, we like to lead this public and private collaboration. The example of Malaga is not only one. We have done the same in other cities across the world. It's very important that these 2 main stakeholders with different vision, but we have a common goal or objective: the private companies and the public, in the sense of reach the sustainability. And also we do a lot of effort in teaching and creating awareness about this concept. And we do that inside our company. We have launched for several years a circular economy academy inside Endesa. But now in this project, we are repeating this, but collaborating with the University of Malaga and with the local stakeholder. But we think that it's important to create this awareness about this concept, how to apply to cities.
Amazing. I want to put a pin in that the academy part, the sort of education awareness, and come back to that in a bit with all three of you.
Okay.
But sort of completing the trio for this first sort of barrage of questions. Gar, we've spoken about, you know, disruption. We're focusing here at the city level and infrastructure to support clean energy, to support new opportunity. What about the stuff that already exists? And you and I have spoken many times, right? But where does Reaply really enable this exchange? And what do you see as your role when we look at this through the lens of inclusive cities?
Yes, Reaply, we walk a fine line of being both a disruptor and an enabler, where we are both disrupting the patterns of the status quo of maybe making something, using something, and then throwing that thing away. And that can happen on two fronts. It can happen on an enterprise front. And I might have to shut a door. This is city living, people. So if there's a siren coming by, but on the enterprise front, there's always rules, regulations, business processes and units that aren't enabled to actually facilitate the reuse of items or identify the reuse of value at the company level. And so often that means on the enterprise front, we're going in and working with teams to understand not only what the potential is for the reuse of materials or the reuse of infrastructure within their own company, but also identifying the very legitimate barriers that are set up to essentially increase just the linear flow of resources, which is organizations are set up to buy things, use things, and throw them away. It's how the current system's set up. And so we're constantly almost playing a game of enablement of those teams to help change the processes that are set up. And then that's the same also on the public front, which is that our governments, when we talk about cities, I see cities in two different views. One is the city that serves the constituency. So what is a city doing to enable circular movement of materials and resources across its small businesses, its voters, its nonprofits, and other NGOs, but then also the city itself. And so the city itself can often be the banner waver for circular movement. We see so many cities that say, oh, we're the first city to be fully renewable on their energy. I think what sometimes people don't understand is that actually literally means the city infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily mean the whole city itself. And so, what we're really trying to do is say, hey, not only can you be a circular city with your own internal infrastructure, your FF&E, your furniture, your fixtures, your equipment, everything that makes your city operate, but also you can help sort of build a solution for your constituency. And so there are lots of levels of which we're engaging with different, again, enterprise or government clients to try to enable those transactions across whatever field we're allowed to play in, essentially.
I do like that kind of almost differentiating view, two views of the same entity, right? When we think about city level infrastructure and influence, that's very different to the boundaries of a city as well, and what it means to its people and the communities. So I guess that leads me to sort of think about the challenges then, and this is to all of you, right? The challenges that you currently see if we take a human-centered or community-centered design, because ultimately someone's got to pay for this, right? Someone's got to pay for this transition. And whilst I think no governing city in their right mind wouldn't look to try and understand what are the innovative technologies that they can bring, but budgetary constraints, economic challenges are always at the forefront of making these things a reality. So how do we balance the economics of change with a drive and the needs of the community at the center? And I'll throw that open to all three of you.
So I deal with that challenge quite a bit because obviously there are visionaries within many of the cities and municipalities that I speak with, and they have these wonderful master plans of what their vision of their city could be. And then they're stuck with the reality of budgets and fiscal constraints and the whole, and so part of what I hope to do when I'm communicating with them is that, you look at the highest and best value first. Where are you going to get your biggest bang for the buck? And from there, make a commitment as a city, and we call it like a green fund almost, is that when your first step is producing some economic savings. And rather than throwing that back into the general fund, put it into a green fund so that all of those funds saved from the first initiative can be used to fuel the next initiative, and so on and so forth. So it becomes a very cumulative, direct carve out for sustainability and circularity within the city, and not let it get so trapped into just going into the general fund that the savings that you've done with your first initiative just disappears into the atmosphere somewhere.
Yeah, I think that it's no longer feasible for governments and only governments to work in isolation. So I think that we have to involve all the stakeholders, as we said before, all the circular ecosystem, as we call in Enel. In addition to the public-private alignment, the action of the citizen is essential, because the citizens are the key factor for achieving more circular cities. Not only do they carry out an individual activity, but also they collaborate as part of public administration and private companies. And there is like a magic triangle between the public administration, the private companies, and the citizens. Through collaboration, but also mutual demands, we think that is the way to achieve these objectives. And it is needed a cultural change in the community, and also, like you have said, a huge investment. We have to invest in a lot of things, in renew building insulation, climatization solutions, but also developing electric vehicle recharge infrastructure, or developing renewable plants, or digitalization of the power grids to support these new renewables. A power company like us, we are investing in all these things, but there is also that in this triangle, magic triangle, that the government does give some helps to the companies and the citizens, but also that the citizen and the companies do this step, this incremental step, like Cindy has told, perhaps starting with things that are with a payback, a short payback, and that allows savings, but they have to be committed to invest and start doing these steps forward. Yeah.
Thanks, Juan. Thanks, Cindy. Gar?
Yeah, absolutely. Juan Manuel, I want to support your point there, and then also disagree a little bit, because we in the States deal with a different constituency sometimes, and there are many differences in that magic triangle. And I think there are, we have recycling here in the States that can sometimes mean that enterprise points to government, government points to citizens, citizens point to enterprise, and they all say, oh, it's their problem to solve. And so it becomes almost a destructive triangle in a way, where then no one takes the initiative to just put their neck out and be like, this is what the rule should be, this is what the law should be, or this is what, as an enterprise, we should support in order to enable or take that first step. And so I think someone always needs to take that risk. And I think this is where we can get caught in that triangle a little bit. And I've got an example of that too. Actually, there's a realistic, I'd love to get to Rosella's comment in the chat, which is there's basically, when we're talking about cities, I have a very specific passion for one particular public entity, which is public schools in the United States. We've been studying one public school system in the United States for some time now, trying to figure out how to get in the doors, and we cannot figure out how they won't take our calls, because here is our use case. From a circular standpoint, we've got schools, and there are, let's say, a couple hundred of these schools in our region. We've got schools that aren't connected to one another. We have schools that also aren't connected to the central system of the school system. Now, what ends up happening is, because of that logistical or even communication breakdown, each school starts to make decisions around their own procurement and their own disposition of resources that are coming in and out of those schools. Now, we're talking valuable desks and chairs, specifically either for teachers or for students, but that in our system here in the States have significant markup. So these desks and these chairs can actually end up being $100 a pop each, which racks up quite quickly to tens of thousands of dollars that happen on quite regular procurement cycles. Now, what's fascinating about that is, by implementing a system in which not only can your schools communicate to one another, but then also communicate to a central location around, hey, this is what we need, this is what we have, no longer essentially is the system just relying on the individual schools to throw stuff away or to ship it to a central location, and then to have someone from another school walk to that location or travel to that location to physically pick it out. Now, the point I'm getting at is that by implementing a system which all of those parts can talk to one another, either peer-to-peer or to the organization itself, there's a lot of savings. And so we're talking about money. These are actually just simple solutions when it comes to connecting value internal to large organizations. As we scale a lot of these organizations, we often lose communication paths to the departments that are also functioning within our same companies. And so we lose those connections, which means there's lots of value that's just evaporating. And so when we're getting to cities here, Rosella, any city that's supporting the connection and building the framework to actually support connections between businesses and connections between businesses and the actual government that is protecting, enabling, or even developing a value in those constituencies. I actually can really point to one specifically right now. We've got a lot of conversations in the iron, and a lot of great cities are stepping up to the plate, but San Francisco is crushing it, in our opinion, because again, they're creating systems in which they're allowing the recapture of materials, the recapture of items that are coming from deconstructed buildings or deconstructed construction sites, or whatever is coming out of these materials. We can actually start to recapture them and redistribute them back through the community. So I have to give a shout out to San Francisco. Thanks everybody for the time there.
I mean, thank you all three of you. Like, huge amount to unpack or deconstruct from those. But I guess it brings for me a kind of thought, which something, Manuel, you brought up a little while ago around education, because Cindy mentioned there about kind of putting money from green or initiatives that save money into a fund specifically for that. But what tied together through all of your three kind of responses there was, there are competing priorities. And when you look at something like the United States, there are competing priorities state to state, city to city, municipality to municipality, the same this side of the Atlantic as well. So if we think then about education and we think about awareness, Gar, you raise a really great point about communication, but it's good communicating and connecting. But I guess if we don't allow people to understand why those connections are important, why those decisions, procurement, hyperlocalization of procurement or otherwise are important, surely we're not going to get any further. So can we talk a little bit about the education of the concept? How do we bring people on the journey?
Yeah, so, it's interesting. I'll jump in here and I'm going to piggyback on Gar's comment about schools. Obviously, schools are public sector, so they're one of the clients that I talk with. And I was engaged with one of the largest school districts in the United States. And they haven't even gone to an LED upgrade yet. They're still in the, fluorescent age. So they have the ability to really capture a lot of energy by upgrading and adding some controls. But they're operations director was very transparent in that he cannot even think about funding an initiative of that magnitude until he re-educates the people that will be using the buildings. And he said, because, we've tried in the past to incorporate energy savings methodologies via controls or other things. And if the people that are in that building day to day are not exercising the initiatives that we're putting in place, or in some cases purposely disabling the initiatives, then we're just continuing to throw money. So he was very transparent in that we have a radical innovation mindset change that has to happen. And you will always have different groups of people, the early adopters that are going to be there and say, yes, I'm all in on this. You've got, ones that will come along, and then you've got those that will not come kicking and screaming. And it really goes back to education and finding the value and why are we doing this, not just regimenting that we're doing this.
Really interesting point there about kind of mindset. And I want to come on to behavior in a bit, but Juan, you mentioned about the sort of Circular Economy Academy.
Yeah, I can share a little bit more about this initiative. We have developed this academy, but it's focused in employees. And what we are doing, all the organization, is pushing each business line to rethink their value chain from linear to circular. So it's not just theoretical awareness or teaching, is to put hands on and work and push to each business line to identify initiatives and to start with initiatives in the circular economy. And one thing very important also is we not only look at KPIs, operational or more, we look also to economic KPIs. All the initiatives that we push internally in NL Group and Endesa related with circular economy, we look for the savings and the benefits, how circular economy also we can achieve less risk in the geopolitical scenario that we are living, because we have to, we are strong believers or circular economy because we think that it makes us more competitive as a company. We are not doing this for imagine. We are implementing a lot of initiatives where we are having return money, and we are trying that all the employees work on this, not just learn or assist to panels. No, we are working on this, and we want that this can be the part of the DNA of the company.
Amazing. I think it just feels really obvious to take education as the kind of the lead, but as we've already heard through the course of this question, there are always competing priorities. Gar, I just want to throw it straight back at you towards the end of this. It kind of started from the end of the previous sort of question, but any final thoughts on the sort of the education point?
Yeah, I think that speaks to the enablement part that we often engage with, which is we're selling, and we're always selling. That's what we have to do as a company that's growing. I mean, we're now a 55+ organization, so we're still scrapping away at growing our company. But this is what it gets to, is that we have essentially been able to figure out how to best support and educate the people that we're selling to. And so what that means for us is almost sometimes stepping away from circular economy, stepping away from sustainability, starting with savings, starting with the economics of this, and saying, hey, this is what could make you not only more efficient in the role, more efficient as a department, but maybe more resilient as a company. And then engage in the layers of why this is actually not only beneficial to the company, but beneficial to your community as well, or the constituency in which you serve. And so from there, it's always an education with a reinforcement, because a lot of what we are doing too, and I so commend our sales team, is at Reaply, we've actually been super lucky to have a different type of sell. This is a highly collaborative. We are there to actually be arm in arm with you as you make your pitch to the bosses, the overseers, the people that are making that decision on the direction of the company. And so often that means of essentially answering the question of like, why should we do this? And it needs to be supported with the education as well as the economics of this is what's right. This is how we can support you as a leader, but then this is how we can actually make sure that the risk that you're taking in pushing forward a new, better way of doing things, that you're not actually going to be on the chopping block as well as we push forward through this together.
I love that, Gaurav. It's a lovely kind of segue for me, because you and I have spoken a number of times about the importance of storytelling, right? And that point you put out there is really important. Like it's the message needs to be the same, but the narrative needs to change depending on who you're talking to. If it's your CEO, your CFO, the guys and girls on the shop floor, your consumers, your customers, your clients, it's about pulling those right levers. And I think the economic lever is a really obvious one. And you'd expect it from this panel being about the role the private sector takes in inclusive circular cities. We had a very different flavor of conversation earlier in the week. But I think that profitability lever is an important one, because we can't just tear down the system we have and expect one to pop up in its place. We need to transition it as we go. One of the other big levers, and there's a question here that I want to pull in from Nicole, is around policy, right? Policy. We've talked about how you can focus on the economics, but what are the levers that government should be pulling, and what are the business cases that corporate champions should be building to help enable a circular system and models? Cindy, I want to come to you to start with, if I may.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and I'm going to go back. Over a decade now. But when the U.S. Green Building Council first came out with LEED certification, and there were, I'm going to say, the early adopters, and I was one of them, where we were really trying to push the thought process of building a more sustainable building, and it really lagged amongst those champions for the longest time, until the federal government in the U.S. decided to mandate some of these green building policies and made it mandated for their own federal buildings. And it wasn't until that regulatory policy was put in place that I saw the true takeoff. And then there were, so from the private sector at that point in time, there was an additional cost, maybe a 10, 15, 20% upcharge to build green. And from the economies of being fiscally responsible to their organization, they're saying, well, what is my return on this additional increase? And not until the real estate or the appraisal market started recognizing and adding core value, monetary core value to those buildings, did it really start to make sense for large developers, large property management companies to put the extra money into it. And then the mindset started changing. So then suddenly the people that wanted to occupy office space or occupy residential space were willing to pay a premium for those buildings that were more sustainable and had, were bringing more climate value to the building, and they were willing to pay for it. So that in of itself is very circular, because if the constituents or a consumer is willing to put more value on something that is sustainable and climate friendly, then the private sector is much more willing to actually give those type of initiatives, because their profitability that they have a fiscal responsibility to stockholders to does not fall. So that's, again, the mindset change.
Thanks, Cindy. I just want to put on a thread there, if I may, and I think, Juan Manuel, this might come into to you next with regards to some of the lessons you've learned from Malaga. I guess the bit that sticks in my mind, Cindy, is access, economic access. When we think about new technology, when we think about subsidies, when we think about stuff costing more, the early adopters, it does, in my mind, almost then create this idea of gentrification that creates a barrier for those that maybe aren't socially or economically mobile enough to be part of that conversation, be part of that new technology. So I wonder, Juan Manuel, in the context of Malaga, has that come up at all? And the other bit I think leads into this is when we think about urban mining, urban harvesting, and the cost of materials versus the location of where those materials are assembled into buildings. And as we start to potentially see differences in those economic models, what does it mean for the people that live in those spaces? Oh, you're on mute. I'm glad I got to say that, even 2 years in.
So the main barriers that we have seen, for example, in a city Malaga initiative, is that when you are talking with the enterprise, they have to get savings, or all initiatives has to be profitable for them. So so we have to get an approach like I think Gar or Cindy have explained also, that we have to try to do the numbers for them in all the initiatives, and they in this way they can know, they can see that they are very interesting for them. For example, now there are some external things that are helping, because at least in Spain and in Europe, because of the geopolitical scenario and the increased price of gas and also the increased price of energy in all the countries, things that needed perhaps 5 or 6 years for getting the payback, now you get the payback in 2 years or less. So some subsidies for investing in photovoltaic panels on the roof of the buildings, or a lot of things start to be very interesting from the point of view of economy. So it's helping to start doing this initiative. But in other case, it's more difficult to start doing this initiative, because it's something complex. They don't have resources also that are thinking depending on the size of the company. For example, in Spain, there are a lot of small companies, and they've got less resources to think about this. So what we are trying also in the project is try to give them advice, in that way they for free can get some information and business model that they can analyze in a very quick way.
It's a really interesting point, and I think for me is always almost the opposite side of the coin of the statement I made just now, that actually an organization like now, large organizations do have those resources to potentially absorb some of those costs, because they can see the longer term strategic business play rather than the cost today. But I do wonder how that always translates right down into the community. Gar, I wonder from your perspective, and I guess that's where Reaply started, right? Looking at exchange, at the community level. But how has that evolved as well for you guys?
Yes. So for us, so Reaply start from an exchange perspective was really a peer-to-peer solution. So we were actually focused on universities. How are we connecting researchers to one another so that they can save money by exchanging materials or resources that they don't need anymore and save money on their budgets. So quickly after that, we realized, okay, there's actually more to this, because the reality of it is that when some don't want something, others might be willing to take it in the state that it's in. And that could either be something that's in perfectly good condition or something that's worn, but those willing to actually just take it for free could fix it up, use it, and be able to save money in their own community uses of those items. What we need to get to, and where Reaply is really focused, is around regions and around local circular economies, because that's really going to be the powerful part of what the economy part of a circular economy will mean, which is how do we actually enable development and growth of not only a workforce that can be local, that can help maybe refurbish or remanufacture or move value from one part of a city to another. What does that mean in terms of economic development? I mean, that's really huge. And so what we've started to see is when we're thinking about our focus, which is furniture and fixtures and equipment at the enterprise level, well, it doesn't always make sense to ship something from very far away to yourself. And so how can we actually enable local development? And so now we're starting to partner with local providers who can refurbish and remanufacture chairs and desks. And that supports local access to what is going to be, I think, the future of circular economy in any city, which is actually getting back to making things again locally, and being more present in the value that's created by enabling those jobs, by educating those jobs, by supporting that growth for individuals in those communities. I want to take a second to recognize some of these questions in the chat when it comes to, well, then what does that mean for subject matter experts to help support in that transition? Typically that means, well, just being as loud as you can if you're a subject matter expert and trying to better understand where you can fit into current solutions in your community and how you can help educate. But we've actually had this problem from a subject matter expertise where we can go into organizations and we can say, hey, this is the best thing we can do, but we don't have enough knowledge about how that organization runs in order to help them move to a more circular future. And so what we've actually had to create is a little bit of a model in which we're helping consult and get the doors opened a little bit more so we can get a little bit more of an aperture. So no pun intended here, Cindy, let more of that light of information through and really actually better understand how to solve those problems. And so we've had to do a lot of work on establishing our model where we can learn more about how the organization works, how we can see the barriers, how we can fix and work with the teams to maybe get rid of a process so that something gets enabled and that actually can help. And so that's how we as subject matter experts have been able to be supported by organizations, by them saying essentially, here's more knowledge. Now, when it comes to basically what does this mean from again, an inclusion perspective? Well, there's more work that needs to be done on tying our enterprise clients to the impact locally. And so that's also too where we always need to look at, frankly, a lot of people think inclusion or community access or is like just donating things to the communities. That's not necessarily the case. And in fact, donations from a physical resource standpoint is kind of a double-edged sword. If you're donating just resources to communities that like physical resources, typically that might mean that those resources will actually end up in the same landfills that maybe are around those communities, because those items will wear, they'll end up not being useful in those communities. And then there's no recapturing element from there. And so it is a lot about how are we refiguring out how to connect these communities to be the enablers of economic and circular economic success, and not necessarily just the beneficiary of it, essentially. I hope that people understand what I'm saying about that. Is like, it's not just about giving and giving and giving. It's about actually connecting and becoming a more resilient community and working with and in those communities about what those communities need.
Thank you, right? Because this is the complexity of systems change, right? It is that idea of everything has an equal and opposite reaction when we do things like that. And I think there's another bit you raised there around, there's another consideration that if our methodology is just to give stuff to those that need it in that kind of model that you just described, how do you ever change or disrupt what happens in the longer term? Like, you almost perpetuating the challenge. And as you quite rightly said, it doesn't necessarily mean that material comes back into the system. It's just a delayed linear model, because eventually it still ends up in landfill or incineration. I want to just pull out one comment before we pivot a little bit more from here. It was in the chat, which someone mentioned about holding corporations and governments accountable by their shareholders, and governments being held accountable by the public. I think we touched on policy a little bit as a lever before, but I think there's another element here. It is that. But it is also then the education. It's also then the communication. Again, back to this idea of complexity of the topic of circular economy, We have to hold people accountable. We have to be transparent. We have to help folks understand, but we also need to be mindful of one of the points you raised before, Cindy, around kind of how do we shift behaviors. So I guess the bit I want to pull on now a little bit is how do we start to change some of the methodologies, the normalization of these new business models, these new technologies, potentially the way that we interact with our cities, we demand our energy. How do we start to normalize those behaviors? Any thoughts on that?
So I do think it's a bit generational. So, you know, I look at being maybe of the older generation. And I say that, you know, I have had the luxury or the unfortunate to see how each generation views this topic. And I do believe that we're moving into a generational awareness of climate action, of sustainability, and I believe that we need to capitalize on that. And what I mean by that is to continue to spread the word to our next generation. And so I think that the closed minds will eventually phase out or age out of the conversation, and the new generations, I believe, are going to be there to carry forward the torch. One of the things that I want to go back to something Gar had talked about was, you know, exactly everything that his company is doing is something that I had explored over a decade ago in the New York City construction market, of course. And so one of the beautiful things there is that disposing of valuable construction waste costs the disposer quite a bit of money, at least in large metropolitan areas. So merely by refocusing where that valuable construction waste can go does automatically bring value. And then you do find those underadvantaged, maybe it is a smaller, we were looking in the chat here, was, you know, is it small to medium enterprises? Maybe it's utilizing those resources to the small and medium enterprises that then continue to help them grow, but knowing that it is and creating a circular path that at the end of that useful life, if there is still some construction materials that are left over, then we continue to pass it on. And so it's really about trying to create an entire, you know, like a cog, you know, a whole circular path of how people, you know, take what they have, pass it on to the next, pass it on to the next. I'll bring Signify into this just slightly. We went into our 3D modeling and we can now print luminaires, and we have a send back process that if you decide to change styles or methodologies, you don't throw it out, you send it back and we can remelt it back down again and reconfigure another luminaire. We're trying as a manufacturer to bring more of that ability for circular recouping of assets back into repurposing them into reusable assets again. So to Gar, to you, everything you're doing, I feel like, you know, you're just somebody, your company is after my own heart. So thank you for your efforts there. I wanted to get that in before the end of this.
No, and there's a couple of points there, Cindy, which I think are really interesting. And you know, everything you described there, or, you know, getting back to that second principle of a circular economy of keeping products in use at their highest value, back to the economics.
Right.
But I wonder with the, you know, the intergenerational or even the sort of biases that we all kind of carry when we think about inclusive circular city, I wonder if we've got time to wait. Like if we've got time, if we've got the ability to be patient for those kind of thoughts to catch up, and actually we need to be a little bit more proactive or a little bit more deliberate, maybe in sort of quietening some of the sort of the older ways of approaching this and some of the energy that we've seen coming from the next generations coming through. Well, Manuel, I want to turn to you really quickly, if I may. And you know, the work in Malaga, 30 different organizations. And can you talk a little bit about cross-sector industry collaboration? Because I wonder, you know, when you're looking at the Malaga Park and looking at that, there are competing priorities. So how do you bring those folks together behind this sort of unified idea of what good looks like? Oh, you're still on mute.
Thank you. In ACT Malaga, there are companies for very different sectors. There are industrial companies, but mainly there are some industrial and some TICs. And we are putting together with the common goals. And for example, there are some industrial food alimentary companies. One of them, we are trying to use their water that is a waste for them, and reuse this water for other purpose of other companies. So taking into account the goals that we have defined, we try that every company shares the materials that they've got and how can be a sub-product that can be used for another industrial. This is more in the industrial area, but in the other areas is more sharing. For example, there are a lot of TIC companies, ICT companies, technology information companies. We are trying that they collaborate, although they are competitors, they collaborate to create some kind of platform or solutions that can be generate this collaboration that also Gar told before. Just to mention another example, we, like a power company, Endesa, has another examples of cross-industry collaboration. For example, in the mobility area, in Spain, we have launched a bundle of products, and we collaborate with Nissan, Hyundai, and Kia. There is a bundle where you can get an electric car with a recharge point at your home and with the ability to recharge in our network. So we are doing some bundle of services and products with other industry, like the car industry.
Cindy, have you got anything? I imagine when you were talking before about sort of 3D printing, that requires you to engage with your customers about this is what it's going to look, feel like. This is the new kind of the model that we're bringing. How do those conversations factor into this broader agenda?
So it's interesting because, once again, anytime you bring a new concept to the market, there is that lag and acceptance stage. So obviously, through the educational process, we're trying to demonstrate not just the, that it's a circular product, but that there's upfront value to it. So as a lighting designer or as a company owner, being able to customize, because we say if you can dream it, we can now print it. So all these, so it really is bringing the upfront value of customization and all that. And knowing that, if you decide that you're going to have a theme change, if you're a restaurant or retail or hospitality and you want a theme change, you send the fixture back, we melt it down, you give us the new CAD drawing, and poof, now you got a new one with the new theme. And at a reduced price, because you've given us the materials back and we've turned around and repurposed them and sent them back to you at a different price point. So it's it is a lot of education. I've got to tell you, the 3D printed luminaires have not, they're certainly not our bread and butter at this point in our Signify life. But, through introduction, through demonstrations and that, we're hoping that more and more of these things, become just normalized. And I also talk about, like, when we go into, recycled paper and things like that, it's very interesting, again, generationally, when, the recycled paper products started coming up, people like, what am I buying, spending all this money for something that was thrown away? And now it's mainstream. So anything new has a period of time of going through normalization. And once it's normalized, and I think our public sector people have to encourage it, like they're doing in a lot of the northeastern states, banning one-use plastic bags, et cetera, et cetera. So there is, again, going back to what role does private sector play? What role does public sector play? It is it's a push-shove model that requires both of them to be playing actively together at all times to make it work.
I love that approach, Cindy, and I guess, again, this is an area that I really enjoy, this kind of behavioral psychology that we need to apply in trying to get people to adopt the sort of nudge mentality. I think sometimes it's about choice, but also it's about helping people to see the right choices, which I guess pulls back to that point around education as well. We're getting to the end of the session, and we probably could go on for at least another hour, but I'm going to be mindful of the people watching and mindful of our panelists. But I'm going to leave you with one question, and if you can give me a single word or one sentence answer just to finish us off, and it's a little bit playful. If you had a magic wand, what would be the one thing that you would want to unblock in your respective industries when we think about inclusive circular cities? And I'm going to start with you, Gar.
That is, oh my gosh, so much power in just waving that wand. Yes, man, Juan Manuel, if you've got an idea, I'd love a path real quickly.
We'll come back to you. We'll come back to you. We'll let you think.
Phone a friend, Gar.
Well, I think that I can, well, nowadays I think that at least what I think is that the public administration have to prioritize the community and society versus other interests, help companies that want to invest to deploy their projects and not be stoppers, because, for example, in the renewable area, that is power or energy area, we've got a lot of money to invest and we are not going so fast because there are a lot of problems with permittings in the different public administration. So if I wanted to, or if I have a one, I think that this, because my feeling is that the big corporation and the big company, we believe in this, we want to invest in this. At least Enel Group has a clear vision about that the future is sustainability and renewables, and push all the circular economy in all the aspects. And sometimes the stopper is how is the policies, how work the public administration.
So speeding that process up, making that process easy.
Yeah.
Or better yet, my word would be eliminate process. Because it is the bane in a large organization in particular. Getting caught up in processes is the biggest waste of time and biggest waste of innovation that I see in the large corporation is stuck on process.
Yeah, being on the leading edge of innovation, you are cutting new ground, right? So the computer says no mentality, or we've not seen that before, I can imagine is extremely frustrating. Gar, I'm going to throw it back at you. You've got one word.
I can't get it in a word, but Cindy, I think that's great from a process standpoint, because almost on the flip side of that is process has been set up to decrease risk. And so I'm not going to say eliminate risk by any means, but I think there's a certain mentality that we do need to eliminate that says, oh, we can't take this chance because, and to have those reasons already preloaded of why we can't try to do something better. And so it's almost the opposite of risk. It might be the same coin.
Yeah. And amazing. Find those visionaries. Think out of the box. I mean, you get so many people that love to stay in their safe little box with a nice little bow on top of it. Be radical. Do that radical innovation. Be that person in your organization or in your city that is willing to challenge the status quo.
And I think there's a comment just flashed up, which for me is the one thing that we should all be focusing on is we haven't got time for these conversations. It does have to be now. So being a radical, I think, is really important. To the panelists, thank you very much. It's been a real gallop. We didn't even touch food. We didn't really touch investment, although we talked about economics. This is why I love cities as a model, because there are just so many areas that you can go through. And I'm going to try and paraphrase the last kind of 70 minutes, and probably disastrously. We heard about how that kind of public-private citizen triangle can be really enabling, but also can be destructive depending on where the priorities are. We've talked about how new innovative technologies and business models are important, but also what about the material and the considerations that are already out there? And I think the bit I'm taking away most is almost communication is important, but not in isolation. Education is important, but not in isolation. Innovation is important, but not in isolation. This is about how do we bring together the champions to create the spaces we want to live in the future that are equitable, inclusive, and circular, and set up for the future. Thank you very much. This is day 4 of 5. Tomorrow is the last of the Inclusive Circular Cities Forum. Check that out on the Circular Cities Week New York website. It's going to be a big one. And now Metabolic, First Mile, Pixera Global, Reaply, the guys coming together around a really special topic and conversation around this Inclusive Circular Cities. Thank you very much, everyone. All of the assets and slides will be shared to you via email. And we will try our best to get the questions and comments that weren't answered by our panelists and feed that back to you in due course. Thanks very much and look forward to seeing you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.